It is a curious thing that we, the very ones who marvel at the grandeur of the mountains and the depth of the seas, so often fail to see the wonder in ourselves. We gaze upon the stars and admire their brilliance, yet stand before the mirror with doubt in our eyes. And why is this so? Perhaps it is because we have forgotten a fundamental truth, that we are not accidents of nature, nor arbitrary formations of dust and time, but intentional and intricate creations, woven with purpose. Each fingerprint unique, each thought a tapestry of infinite complexity, each soul irreplaceable. To believe otherwise is not only an error of thought, but an injustice to the very one who formed us. From childhood, we are taught, subtly or overtly, to measure ourselves against others. We compare our appearance, our achievements, our abilities, and even our value against an ever-shifting standard. But to measure a fish by its ability to climb a tree is absurd, just as it is absurd to weigh the worth of one soul against another, for each is fashioned with a distinct design. The oak and the rose do not envy one another, for both fulfill their purpose in the grand garden of existence. To love oneself rightly is not an indulgence in vanity, nor an excuse for complacency. It is to see oneself as one truly is, flawed, yet fearfully and wonderfully made. It is not to deny one's weaknesses, but to understand that even imperfections serve a purpose. The sculptor does not discard the marble because of its rough edges, rather, he works upon it until it reveals the beauty intended all along. So it is with us. But let us go deeper still. For self-love is not merely a sentiment, but a duty. If we were designed with intention, then to despise ourselves is to cast doubt upon the wisdom of our Maker. If we were made for a purpose, then to shrink back in self-loathing is to neglect the task set before us. True self-acceptance does not lead to arrogance, but to gratitude. It does not excuse idleness, but calls us to steward well the gifts we have been given. Identity is not something one stumbles upon by accident, nor is it a mere collection of traits assembled haphazardly by the whims of time and chance. It is, rather, a deliberate and intricate design, woven together with a purpose that goes beyond what the eye can perceive. From the moment of existence, each individual is imbued with a uniqueness that cannot be replicated, a distinct essence that is neither borrowed from others nor manufactured by external forces. And yet, the modern world struggles with this very concept, treating identity as something fluid, uncertain, and in constant need of validation from outside sources. But consider for a moment the nature of things that hold true value. A rare gem is not precious because it resembles another, it is valued precisely because it is rare. A work of art is not cherished because it follows the exact strokes of another painting, but because it carries the distinct signature of its creator. In the same way, every person is fearfully and wonderfully made, stamped with an irreplaceable mark of craftsmanship. To see oneself as merely another face in the crowd is to miss the weight of one's existence. The tragedy of human perception is that identity is often mistaken for achievement, appearance, or the approval of society. People spend years chasing after titles, possessions, or status, believing that these things will define who they are. Yet, these pursuits, however grand they may seem, do not create identity, they merely decorate it. A palace is still a palace whether it is covered in gold or in dust. Identity is neither gained nor lost through the accumulation or deprivation of worldly measures, it is something far deeper, something inherent. This misunderstanding of identity often leads to a restless striving for worth. When people are unsure of who they are, they become vulnerable to any voice that offers them an answer. Some seek identity in the mirror, believing their reflection dictates their value. Others seek it in the praise of their peers, measuring their worth by how well they fit into the expectations of others. Still, others chase after accomplishments, thinking that their importance is directly tied to how much they can prove. But none of these things can ever truly satisfy, for they are built upon shifting ground. A man who finds his identity in success will crumble when failure comes. A woman who believes her beauty defines her will despair when age begins to show. Identity that depends on anything external is fragile, constantly threatened by change, criticism, or loss. If identity is not in wealth, beauty, or achievement, then where does it truly reside? It resides in the very core of a person's being, in the undeniable truth that each life is woven with intention. To be fearfully and wonderfully made is to understand that identity is not created by effort or circumstance, but by design. This understanding brings with it both comfort and responsibility, comfort in knowing that one's worth is not subject to the tides of life, and responsibility in recognizing that this worth must not be squandered. The implications of this truth are vast. If identity is something given rather than something earned, then no person is without value, regardless of their circumstances. The child born into poverty is no less significant than the one born into wealth. The individual who struggles with failure is no less purposeful than the one who succeeds effortlessly. The worth of a person is not in what they possess, but in what they are, beings created with intention, possessing gifts that no other can replicate in quite the same way. How often do people fail to see this in themselves? How often do they look upon their reflection with doubt, thinking they are insignificant simply because they do not match the standards set by the world? They forget that even the smallest thread in a grand tapestry plays its part. The loss of a single note can make a symphony incomplete. The absence of a single star does not make the sky brighter, it makes it emptier. So it is with every life, each one carries a purpose that no other can fulfill in exactly the same way. Understanding one's identity as something divinely crafted brings a shift in perspective. Instead of striving to become someone else, one begins to refine who they already are. Instead of seeking worth in fleeting things, one learns to rest in the truth that they are already valued beyond measure. This is not an invitation to complacency but a call to responsibility. For when one truly understands their worth, they no longer live in fear of rejection or failure. They are free to grow, to develop their strengths, to embrace their weaknesses with grace, knowing that even imperfections have a role in the grand design. If one is fearfully and wonderfully made, then self-doubt, comparison, and self-rejection are not just struggles, they are contradictions to the truth. They are falsehoods that must be unlearned, for they rob people of the confidence and joy that come with knowing who they are. The battle for identity is not about discovering something new, but about uncovering what has always been true. It is about stripping away the lies that say one is not enough and embracing the reality that worth has never been in question. It is a strange irony that people can admire the uniqueness of a sunset, the intricacy of a snowflake, or the complexity of the universe, and yet struggle to see themselves in the same light. But the same hand that crafted the vastness of the cosmos also formed every detail of the human soul. To believe in one's worth is not arrogance, it is an act of truth. And to live according to that truth is not selfishness, it is the only way to fully embrace the purpose for which one was created. Comparison is a quiet thief. It does not announce its arrival with loud declarations, nor does it come with forceful commands. Instead, it creeps in subtly, embedding itself in the mind and shaping thoughts before one even realizes its presence. It is the voice that whispers, "You are not enough," when you see someone else succeed. It is the weight in your heart when another's life appears more fulfilling than your own. It is the belief, so often unspoken but deeply felt, that your worth is determined by how you measure up to those around you. People are conditioned to compare. The brightest student in the classroom is praised, while the struggling one is reminded to try harder. Athletes are ranked, performances are graded, and achievements are weighed against the successes of others. Even in seemingly harmless ways, society encourages a mindset that equates personal value with standing above someone else. In such a world, it is easy to begin measuring one's worth through the lens of comparison, as if life were a competition in which only the best deserve to be noticed. But comparison is a false scale. It pretends to be a measure of value when, in truth, it is only a distortion of perception. The worth of a person cannot be calculated by external achievements, beauty, wealth, or status because these things were never meant to be the foundation of identity. A tree does not question its place in the forest simply because another grows taller. A star does not lose its brilliance simply because another shines beside it. And yet, human beings often convince themselves that their significance is diminished when someone else seems greater. The danger of comparison lies in its ability to rob people of joy. It blinds them to their own strengths by constantly shifting their focus to what they lack. A talented artist may look at a renowned painter and feel inadequate, failing to see the beauty in their own work simply because it does not resemble another's. A skilled musician may lose confidence in their abilities because their voice is not as celebrated as another's. A person who is kind, intelligent, and gifted in their own way may still feel small because someone else appears to be more so. The cycle is endless, and no one truly wins in the game of comparison because the standard is always moving, always changing, always just out of reach. Worse still, comparison distorts gratitude. When people measure themselves against others, they begin to view their own lives not in terms of what they have, but in terms of what they lack. The person with a steady job feels dissatisfied when they see someone with greater wealth. The individual surrounded by genuine friendships feels lonely when they see another with a seemingly perfect relationship. The one who has made significant progress in their journey feels behind simply because someone else has reached a different milestone. Gratitude fades in the presence of comparison because the focus shifts from appreciation to inadequacy. What many fail to realize is that no one's life is as flawless as it appears from the outside. The person admired for their success may struggle with unseen burdens. The one praised for their beauty may battle insecurities no one knows about. The individual who seems to have everything together may be facing silent struggles that never make their way into the public eye. Comparison is not only unfair to oneself but also to those being compared against, for it assumes that a single aspect of life defines the whole. Every individual has a unique purpose, a distinct calling that cannot be replicated by another. Just as a painter would never compare two different masterpieces and declare one superior simply because it looks different, people must learn to see their lives in the same way. Some are meant to lead, while others are meant to support. Some create, while others build. Some are called to shine in the spotlight, while others are the quiet force that keeps the world moving. Each role is valuable, and none is lesser than another simply because it does not look the same. To escape the falsehood of comparison, one must learn to appreciate their own journey without constantly glancing at another's. This does not mean ignoring others' successes or failing to admire their gifts. Rather, it means understanding that someone else's greatness does not diminish one's own. A world filled with extraordinary people does not make any single individual less valuable. It makes the world richer, fuller, more complete. Instead of resenting the success of others, one should learn to celebrate it, knowing that there is enough space for everyone to flourish in their own way. The irony of comparison is that it often blinds people to their own uniqueness. The individual who envies another's intelligence may fail to recognize their own creativity. The one who longs for someone else's physical beauty may overlook the warmth and kindness that make them truly attractive. The person who wishes for another's achievements may fail to see the potential within themselves, buried beneath the weight of self-doubt. The truth is, no one else can be exactly what you are. No one else carries the same combination of experiences, talents, thoughts, and perspectives that you do. To waste that uniqueness by constantly trying to fit into another's mold is to reject the very things that make you valuable. Perhaps the greatest freedom one can experience is the realization that they do not have to compete to be worthy. Worth is not earned through superiority over others, it is intrinsic, woven into the very fabric of existence. When people stop chasing after validation through comparison, they begin to live more fully. They begin to appreciate their own gifts without resentment, to admire others without jealousy, and to walk their own path without constantly looking to the side. The goal is not to be the best by someone else's standards, but to be fully, unapologetically, and wonderfully oneself. To accept oneself is neither the easiest nor the most natural thing for a person to do. It requires an honest confrontation with both strengths and weaknesses, an unflinching acknowledgement of one's imperfections, and a willingness to see beyond them. Many people go through life with a quiet, underlying sense of dissatisfaction with who they are. They either believe they must become someone else to be worthy, or that they are somehow fundamentally flawed, unworthy of love and belonging. But self-acceptance is not about self-indulgence or complacency, it is about understanding the truth of who you are and learning to live in that truth without shame or fear. One of the greatest barriers to self-acceptance is the illusion that one must be perfect to be worthy. Society, media, and even personal experiences often reinforce the belief that people must meet an unattainable standard of success, beauty, intelligence, or virtue to be valuable. The problem with this belief is that perfection is an impossible goal. No matter how much a person improves, there will always be flaws, failures, and shortcomings. If worth is tied to perfection, then no one can ever truly feel at peace with themselves. The alternative, then, is to recognize that worth is not something to be earned, it is something inherent. A diamond does not cease to be valuable because it has a flaw. A masterpiece is no less breathtaking because it bears the marks of the artist's brush. Likewise, a person's value is not diminished by their imperfections. Another challenge in self-acceptance is the tendency to define oneself by past mistakes. Many people struggle with a lingering sense of guilt or regret, believing that their past failures have permanently shaped their identity. They allow their worst moments to dictate their sense of self, forgetting that mistakes are not the totality of a person's being. Growth is only possible when one acknowledges that they are more than their errors, more than the sum of their faults. A sculptor does not discard a block of marble because it has rough edges, rather, they work with it, shaping it into something beautiful. In the same way, self-acceptance means seeing the rough edges of one's character not as reasons for despair but as opportunities for refinement. Comparison also plays a destructive role in a person's ability to accept themselves. When people constantly measure themselves against others, they often conclude that they are lacking. Someone else always seems to be more successful, more talented, more attractive, more intelligent. This mindset makes it nearly impossible to appreciate one's own unique qualities. The truth is, no one else has lived your life, walked your path, or carries your exact combination of strengths and weaknesses. Self-acceptance requires a shift in perspective, from seeing oneself as deficient compared to others to recognizing the distinctiveness of one's own journey. Each person brings something to the world that no one else can, and that alone is reason enough to embrace who they are. There is also a misconception that accepting oneself means settling for mediocrity or refusing to grow. Some fear that if they truly accept themselves, they will stop striving for improvement, that self-acceptance is the same as stagnation. But true self-acceptance does not mean abandoning growth, rather, it means growing from a place of confidence rather than self-hatred. A person who accepts themselves does not say, I have no flaws, but rather, I am valuable even as I work on my flaws. They do not strive for change out of a sense of inadequacy but out of a desire to become the best version of themselves. Growth that comes from a place of self-acceptance is healthier and more sustainable than growth that is fueled by shame or self-rejection. Embracing oneself also requires kindness, an ability to extend the same grace to oneself that one would give to a friend. People are often far more compassionate toward others than they are toward themselves. They encourage loved ones, forgive their mistakes, and see their worth even when they struggle. Yet when it comes to themselves, they are harsh, critical, and unforgiving. They replay their failures, magnify their shortcomings, and dismiss their own achievements. Self-acceptance demands a change in this inner dialogue. It requires replacing self-criticism with self-compassion, understanding that no one is meant to go through life without flaws or struggles. One of the most liberating truths about self-acceptance is that it allows people to live authentically. When a person stops pretending to be someone they are not, they begin to experience true freedom. They no longer feel the need to wear masks, to constantly seek validation, or to mold themselves into what they think others expect. Authenticity is one of the rarest and most powerful qualities a person can possess, for it allows them to interact with the world as their true self, without fear of rejection or judgment. Many people spend their lives waiting for the day when they will finally feel enough. They believe that if they achieve a certain goal, reach a certain milestone, or fix a certain flaw, they will finally be worthy. But self-acceptance is not a destination that one arrives at after achieving perfection. It is a choice, one that must be made daily. It is the decision to embrace oneself fully, with both strengths and weaknesses, with both accomplishments and failures. It is the understanding that no amount of external success will ever replace the internal peace that comes from knowing and accepting oneself. The journey towards self-acceptance is not always easy, but it is one of the most important journeys a person can take. It is a process of unlearning the false narratives that say worth must be earned, that perfection is necessary for happiness, that flaws make a person unworthy. It is about learning to see oneself with clarity, to appreciate one's unique gifts, and to grow not from a place of self-loathing, but from a place of love. Self-acceptance is not the absence of growth, nor is it an excuse for complacency. Rather, it is the foundation upon which a life of confidence, purpose, and true fulfillment is built. Fear of judgment is one of the most paralyzing forces in human experience. It has the power to silence voices before they are heard, to hinder potential before it is realized, and to keep people imprisoned in a life that is not truly their own. Many live under the weight of this fear, constantly adjusting their words, actions, and even their personalities to fit the expectations of others. They become performers in their own lives, measuring every step, filtering every thought, and suppressing every impulse that might invite criticism. This fear does not merely influence small decisions, it shapes the very course of a person's existence, dictating what they pursue, what they abandon, and ultimately, who they allow themselves to become. The origins of this fear are deeply rooted in the human need for belonging. From childhood, people are taught, sometimes subtly, sometimes explicitly, that acceptance is conditional. Approval is given when one meets expectations, withheld when one deviates from the norm. A child who speaks too boldly is told to quiet down. A teenager who expresses an unconventional dream is warned to be realistic. An adult who follows an unfamiliar path is met with skepticism. Over time, the lesson becomes clear: deviation invites scrutiny, and scrutiny is to be avoided at all costs. Thus, people learn to shrink themselves, to conform, to shape their lives not according to their own calling, but according to the preferences of those around them. The tragedy of living in fear of judgment is that it robs people of authenticity. When every action is dictated by the opinions of others, a person loses sight of their own voice. Their dreams become secondary to what is deemed acceptable. Their personality becomes diluted by the need to be agreeable. Their choices are no longer truly their own, but are instead shaped by an invisible audience, ever present and ever critical. In this way, fear of judgment does not just create hesitation, it creates a false self, one that is built for approval rather than for purpose. Is that judgment is inevitable? No matter how carefully the person crafts their image, no matter how diligently they try to avoid criticism, there will always be someone who disapproves. Some will think a person is too bold, while others will think they are too timid. Some will criticize for being too ambitious, while others will fault them for not being ambitious enough. The pursuit of universal approval is not only exhausting, it is impossible. No life, however carefully curated, can escape judgment entirely. Recognizing this truth is the first step in overcoming the fear of it. Another key to breaking free from the fear of judgment is understanding that the opinions of others do not define reality. Many people live under the mistaken belief that if someone disapproves of them, it must mean they have failed in some way. But judgment is often more reflective of the one who gives it than of the one who receives it. People criticize what they do not understand. They reject what challenges their own beliefs. They impose their own fears and limitations onto others. If a person allows every negative opinion to dictate their path, they will never move forward, they will remain trapped, not by their own inadequacy, but by the limitations others have placed upon them. Fear of judgment is also fueled by the illusion that people are paying more attention than they truly are. Many hesitate to take risks, to speak openly, to pursue their passions, because they assume that others are watching closely, ready to analyze every move. The truth is that most people are far too absorbed in their own lives to scrutinize others as much as one imagines. A moment of embarrassment that feels monumental to one person is often forgotten by everyone else within minutes. A perceived failure that seems glaringly obvious to the individual is, more often than not, unnoticed by those around them. People worry about judgment far more than they actually experience it, allowing an imagined fear to hold them back from real opportunities. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let it dictate one's life. To live free from the weight of judgment is not to be indifferent to others, but to recognize that their opinions do not hold the final say. A life lived in fear of criticism is a life half-lived, constrained, and unfulfilled. But a life lived in authenticity, despite the inevitable judgment, is one that carries both freedom and purpose. It is the difference between merely existing and truly living. True fulfillment comes when a person embraces who they are, knowing that judgment will come but refusing to let it define them. It means speaking one's truth, even when others disagree. It means pursuing passions, even when they are misunderstood. It means stepping forward, even when others say to stay back. The loudest critics are often those who have never had the courage to step out themselves. Their voices may be strong, but they should never be strong enough to silence a person's calling. When fear of judgment is overcome, an entirely new way of living emerges. Decisions are no longer made out of fear but out of conviction. Actions are no longer weighed against an invisible audience but against personal values and purpose. The approval of others, once so desperately sought, becomes far less important than the approval of one's own conscience. Life ceases to be about fitting in and begins to be about standing firm in who one truly is. The world has never been changed by those who played it safe to avoid criticism. It has been changed by those who dare to be different, who dare to be bold, who dare to live according to their own convictions rather than the expectations of others. Those who leave a lasting impact are not those who fear judgment, but those who refuse to be controlled by it. Each person must decide whether they will live bound by the opinions of others or whether they will break free and walk in their own truth. The choice is not an easy one, but it is the difference between living in fear and living in fullness.